Hello. Today, our quarantine and confidence study is Daniel in the Lion's Den, which is a great, great lesson. You maybe heard it for the first time when you were really little. Maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it, but it is so good for us to have this reminder of God's power. No matter what danger is in front of us, God promises to protect us. Speaking of danger, if you are using the materials underneath this on the Facebook page or on the YouTube channel, one of the questions I asked there is what's your top three I'm afraid moments. I'll just give you not three, but just one. There was one time where my wife and I, Carrie, which we were dating at the time, we were not married or engaged. We were driving to her parents' house in Michigan. We were coming from Martin Luther College in New Ulm, where we both went to college, and we had driven all through the night. And it was a little bit icy and snowy on the road, and I had driven most of the night and I had gone to sleep, and I just woke up and she was taking an exit onto another highway, and we hit a patch of black ice. And I had woken up about 30 seconds before this, so this was all very confusing to me. And the wheels caught, and we ended up flipping over, like, the car, like left to right over, doing, I think, two complete rotations in the air, and then landing on our wheels. And it was, especially for someone who had just woken up, it was extremely scary. We had just missed a big patch of trees by like 20 or 30 yards. So if this had happened a few seconds earlier, the car would have launched into these trees. But the way that it worked was we landed perfectly upright and the car was totaled. Um, the windshield had been peeled back at some point, part of it, and so a bunch of mud had just flown in there. So Carrie and I were just sitting in their car covered in mud, like, what just happened? This all happened in the span of like, 30 seconds, a minute. I don't know how long it was, but it was extremely scary to be flipping over, just have your viewpoint just over like that completely, and then just be sitting there. Um, so that was one of the scariest moments I think I've ever encountered. And yet it was in my head, and I think we talked about this both later, we both were fairly calm inside. And I think most of it had to do with what God has told us He's going to do for us, which is very simply, if we die, or when we die, God is going to take us to heaven because of what Jesus did in our place. So today's lesson, we're going to think about incredibly scary moments and the courage that comes from our faith in God. Daniel shows great courage, so we'll talk about that. Background of this lesson: Daniel was one of those Israelites who'd been taken to the country of Babylon. The nation of Israel had just sort of lost interest in God for a long time, and God said, "This is a bad idea. I don't want you to do this." And Israel did it anyway. So God said, "Well, here's a wake up call for you. You're going to be dragged onto a foreign country for a while until you kind of get the picture." And so all the Israelites are now, or most of the Israelites are living in this foreign land called Babylon. I just think if you're Daniel, if you're one of the few people who still worship the true God, and you're suffering the punishment that everybody else really deserved, and you didn't really deserve that, and you found yourself in this strange land, what would your attitude be? I think our attitude would be tempted to be a little like, I don't like this, I don't deserve this. You'd be sort of grumpy and just mad all the time, especially mad at God that God would allow you to be put in this situation. But that's not what Daniel's like at all. In fact, Daniel is such a hard worker that he gets promoted in the government, which is crazy. Like, they just didn't normally do that with foreigners. But Daniel is rising up in the government kind of hierarchy. They really like his work. He's about 80 years old, we think, maybe at the time this lesson took place. And he does such great work that people get really jealous of him. The Babylonians are like, we got to get this guy out of here. He's making us look bad. We don't like that there's a foreigner that's doing better than us. And so they watch him every day, try to make sure that they can catch him in some bad behavior. But guess what? We said before, Daniel's like working so hard. He's doing amazing work. And why is he doing that? Well, it's because of his faith. He's living out his faith in his workplace. That's one of the questions on the sheet too, is how do we live out our faith in our workplace, in our school, in our community? Our worship doesn't stop when we leave the church sanctuary or we turn off the live stream. Our worship is in everything that we do. And Daniel demonstrated what a strong faith he had by his work ethic. And so they can't catch Daniel doing anything wrong. So they think, new plan, let's use his faith against him. So they go to King Darius, who's in charge, and they appeal to his pride. Pride is such a strong temptation, right? Here's this dude's, taking a selfie of his arms here. So they tell, Darius, they think, hey, we have this great idea. We were all sitting and thinking how awesome you are. How about for the next 30 days, No one can pray to anyone or anything except you. And if they do pray to anyone else, den of lions. And Darius falls right into their trap. He says, yeah, I am a pretty good king. Let's do that. Yeah, next 30 days, anybody prays to anybody except me. Lion's den. Not thinking Daniel's a worshiper of the true God. And Darius and Daniel had a great relationship, it seems, at this point. So he's just not thinking at all what this means for Daniel. But these enemies of Daniel certainly understand that. Well, Daniel hears about this decree, hears that if he does something as simple as praying to the true God, he's going to get thrown into the lion's den. What does he do? He goes home and prays to the true God in front of an open window, like he always did. He doesn't change his routine at all, which is awesome. And this is just such quiet courage. We think of courage the way that movies display courage, where you're like, battling hundreds of guys at a time, or doing some action movie type stuff. But what Daniel does here is such great courage. He just goes home and prays. And he knows that simply by praying, he's taking his life in his hands. But he thinks, God wants me to pray to him. My trust is in God. If I get killed for praying to God, well, I'm going to heaven. So it's a pretty easy decision for him. Well, this is exactly what the enemies of Daniel expected. So I love this picture, a little caption there. Daniel is praying, we got him. So enemies make sure that they see Daniel praying in the open window, and they run to King Darius. And it's so sneaky how they do it. You should read Daniel 6 after you watch this video. They go to Darius and say, hey, didn't you, correct us if I'm wrong, didn't you make a law that nobody could pray to anybody else except you for 30 days? And if they did pray, then they would get thrown in the lion's den. And Darius says, yeah, I did make that law. And they're like, okay. We saw Daniel praying to the God of Israel. And Darius just realizes this is terrible. He loves Daniel. He spends the rest of the night trying to get Daniel off the hook. And maybe you think, well, why couldn't he just change the law? He's the king. Well, at this time, kings were seen as sort of godlike figures. So if you just suddenly change a law that you had made, it was seen as a sign of weakness. So from Darius' standpoint as king, his hands are tied. There's nothing he can do. And so the enemies of Daniel's, the night's over, say it's time to throw him in the lion's den. And they do. We picture the lion's den, maybe similar to what we pictured with the furnace and the 3 men the other day. An opening at the top in which Daniel would be lowered into it. Not the greatest resolution in this picture, but helps you get the idea. And then the lions would have been maybe let through in the side. And what they would do is they would not feed the lions for a long time, so that the lions would be extremely hungry when someone was thrown in there. And Darius is so upset by this. Before the stone is placed over the opening, he says something kind of great. He says, may your God whom you serve continually rescue you. It's sort of weird to have the king who's about to execute him offering him this word of encouragement, but it shows you how Darius feels about Daniel. He really cares about him, and he really does hope that whatever God Daniel's worshiping will help him out. Well, the next morning, I should say before that, Darius is so worked up about this that he refuses any food, any entertainment that night. He just wants to sit and be miserable and think about this mistake that he made that might have cost Daniel his life. The next day, he runs to the pit, has the stone rolled, moved away, and says, Daniel, are you still alive? And Daniel says, yep, I'm still here. And you can just imagine how, Darius' heart must have been beating through his chest like, wow, he survived. Like his God is real and really protected him. And I can't believe my friend that I care about is still alive. How awesome a moment that must have been for Darius. And Daniel gives all credit to God. He says, my God sent an angel. He closed the mouths of these lions and kept me safe. And so Darius has Daniel hauled out of there. And actually, it's Daniel's enemies that end up getting punished with being thrown into the lion's den. So there's a total reversal here. And at the end of the text here, we don't know exactly what Darius ended up believing about God, but he says some awesome things about the true God and just how great he is for rescuing Daniel. So there's a nice ending in that regard. Why is this such a good lesson for us now? Well, I'll show you. I just did a screenshot of Cincinnati.com today. None of these headlines, I think, are going to be really surprising to you. They all have to do with the pandemic and the quarantine and different restrictions like that. We have this enemy in front of us right now, and in some ways it's an unseen enemy. It's microbial. We can't see the virus where it is around us. We're just constantly feel like, is it there? Are we going to get it? Is it going to make us sick? Is it even going to kill us? And those fears are real. Those are very understandable fears. But we need to remember that the God who closed the mouth of lions is still the God who watches over us. He was there with Daniel, and he's with us today. Whatever happens is going to be to God's glory and to our eternal benefit. Uh, Maybe we do get sick. Maybe our lives are lost here on this earth. One day that will happen no matter what. We're going to leave this world, and in some ways it might feel very sad, but actually that's going to be the greatest victory we've ever known. This God that protected Daniel, that protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, don't you want to meet him face to face? Don't you want to see him in heaven and just thank him for all he's done and get into the business of enjoying eternity? That's, as Christian, that's what death means. So for us, this is a win-win situation. We go about this life confidently, knowing that this God who protected Daniel is watching over us. And we know that no matter what happens, when our life ends, we're going to meet that same God, that God of power, that God of grace, face to face. Maybe just leave us with these words in our mind, those words that King Darius said, "May your God whom you serve continually deliver you." That's our prayer for you too, watching this video, that God would deliver you, and especially that God would give you a strong faith, that no matter what goes on in our world, God is still in control. And most of all, that God of power, he really does love you. Individual watching this video, he loves you so dearly, and he is watching over you. Okay, I hope you found this devotion beneficial. Just a quick word. I am recording this on Wednesday. I mentioned the other day that President Zarling from MLC was diagnosed with coronavirus. The good news, he has gone home from the hospital and he's recovering, so that seems like a great situation there. Thank God for protecting him. May God watch over and protect all of you as well. Thanks.